There's four major types of radiation that I like to talk about. And we experience radiation all around us all the time.
And the technology within the nuclear we talk about is SMRs, small modular reactors. So how are they different than nuclear power sources or main larger nuclear power plants?
The power unit raft, and we have all these different things. And we build the structure that goes around, install those things. Submarines are a prime example of a small modular reactor.
Do you think an AI trained on all nuclear science will be able to take her job?
No, I do not. I do not, because...
And have you played with AI and how good it is in terms of being a chief nuclear officer?
We have our own defense accredited AI system.
I want to do two things. That analogy to make power the Arky Sparky one.
Okay.
Redo it.
Yeah.
And before we get started, please subscribe so that you never miss an episode of our cutting edge contemporary conversations. Thank you. Welcome, Mark. How are you?
I am great. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for your time today. I'm very much intrigued in having this conversation on everything nuclear / radiations. But before we go talk about those things, can you give us a bit of a background of yours and your story?
First off, there's everything nuclear is I know very little. I know a lot compared to most, but I know very little. The nuclear industry is a huge industry. So we'll start with my journey.
Yeah.
How does this guy who's wearing an Australian Navy shirt or jumper that's obviously not Australian end up in Australia talking about nuclear energy. So we'll go way back into the 90s.
The genesis.
The genesis. So I was taking a physics course in high school, and we had a 2-week segment where we talked about the chart of nuclides. For your audience who doesn't know, the chart of nuclides is it's the periodic table, but for physicists. Right. So whereas the periodic table, you have hydrogen in the upper left, you got helium.
Yeah.
Well, the chart of nuclides starts with the neutron at the bottom, and then you have 7 versions of hydrogen, like 12 versions of helium, and it stacks up in this big, giant, almost like river-like thing, and it's this huge chart. What's really fascinating about me is that I remember we were talking about nuclear, we talked about uranium, and if uranium-238 atom absorbs a neutron, it then becomes uranium-239. And then that uranium-239, after a period of time, will eject an electron out of its nucleus, and then it becomes neptunium-239. And that'll eject another electron out of its nucleus, and then it becomes plutonium-239, which we'll start off, everyone's going to know, yes, that is the stuff that is used in weapons. We just had the 80th anniversary of VJ Day. That was the Nagasaki bomb. It was powered by plutonium. So I understand there's a lot of fear and danger that comes with this. We'll just start that out early. So I decided I want to go into nuclear. And so I was submitting applications to different universities that had nuclear reactors. We have like 15 universities, or 15 or more universities in the United States that have nuclear reactors for research purposes. So that's what I was looking at. And I happen to know the U.S. Navy recruiter personally. And I'd gone and think fell on his sheet, and he calls me between my year 11 and year 12. And he goes, "Hey, this is Petty Officer Fosjord. I'm looking for Mark Schneider." I said, "Yeah, this is Mark." He goes, "Yeah, have you thought about joining the Navy?" I'm like, "Well, Steve, stop. Let's talk like we know each other." He goes, "All right." Yeah, I goes, "Hey, Mark." He goes, "Have you thought about joining the Navy?" And I, being a jerk of a sarcastic 17-year-old kid, goes, "Oh, only if you have nuclear power." He goes, "Boy, do I have a job for you." So when you talk about social license, like here I am, I'd been grown up the entire U.S., had no idea that we had nuclear powered warships. We had carriers, submarines, and cruisers that were nuclear powered at that time. And I had no idea. So I said, yeah. And that is like, this is great. I don't have to pay for it. I get paid to do it, and I get to learn it. So I joined the Navy at age 18. Went through my training my initial training up in outside of Chicago in Illinois, and then I went to my nuclear training down in Charleston, South Carolina. So everyone here is Australian. That's where it is watching is supposed to be Australians. There's lots of Australians right now that are in Charleston, South Carolina, undergoing training at the same place that I went through my training.
Okay.
So I did my training there, and then I went and I served on 3 submarines and a nuclear-powered aircraft carrier. Worked for the United States Navy's regulator, Naval Reactors, and then I had a whole bunch of contract maintenance, I ended my career providing contract oversight for maintenance on primarily aircraft carriers. And then, so after 20 years of working as a nuclear power plant operator for the United States Navy, I retired. And I decided to work for a power company, Dominion Energy. Dominion Energy owns 5 nuclear power stations, 4 of which are operational. And I worked at Surrey Power Station as an operator there. So I just took my military experience and it translated very well into operating experience. I worked there for 3 years. My wife, her career progression, she's a nuclear engineer as well. So, we're a nuclear power couple is the running joke. So her career was taking off. And one of the things about working at a power station is we're pretty certain the lights stay on 24/7, 365 days out of the year. So means you have to have people working 24 hours a day, 365 days out of the year. So I was working shift work, and that's just, I was, now over 40. And I decided that I wanted to kind of step away from that. So I took a massive pay cut to go work for the United States Coast Guard, to get out of private sector and move kind of back more into the public sector. And I worked for the United States Coast Guard as an electrical engineer with communication systems. So at one point, I actually owned all long-range communication systems on anything that didn't fly for the U.S. Coast Guard. So I actually had equipment that was up in Exmouth. So I had equipment in Guam. I had, if you see a vessel that's white with orange stripes on it, I had equipment on it. That was that I owned, that my group sustained and maintained. And then my wife got this opportunity to come support this little known thing called AUKUS. And so I took a leap of faith and I found this wonderful company that was working on their nuclear supply chain certification called UBH Group. And so that's how I ended up here as the chief nuclear officer, the inaugural chief nuclear officer for UBH Group. And and that was my journey into nuclear and into Australia.
Wow. That's very intriguing in terms of the breadth of the experience and where you started as a young boy. Can I also, want to go back just before we delve into further nuclear. As a young man, you being very, what do you call it? Not very conversational, very standoffish when you're talking to the officer who calling you for the role. What was happening in the leading up to that age as a young boy, which led you to getting into more physics and having that big head on you?
Yeah. So this is going to probably sound terrible. I was out of spite of my brother. My brother was a jock, and I love him to death. And Paul, if you ever see this, I do love you, and you were a jerk to me as a kid. But so my brother was a big jock, and I was a big nerd, right? So let's now.
You don't have your big thick glasses.
I know. I've never had. My brother was one of actually the big thick glasses, which is really funny that he became the jock. Now, understanding my brother's also the first person to get a degree, and he got a master's degree before anyone else. Of my total, I have a total of 6 of us, so I have 5 siblings, and so this is my full biological brother. But he was a super big jock, and so I always kind of loved science. I was always really good at school. My brother somewhat struggled in school, and so he gravitated towards sports.
Yeah. Right,
and I said, I don't want to be like him. He gravitates towards sports. I want to go towards science. So I literally took every science course that my school offered. And I loved science as a kid. And yeah, it's there's something about learning how the world works, right? Like I find it fascinating, when I start a car, how does that electrical signal go? You come from the battery to the starter that causes the coil, that causes the engine to rotate, that starts the fuel injector, that causes the fuel to explode, right? The ability to understand how our world works is really something I've always kind of been fascinated with. And then what really makes it cool about nuclear is that all those things you can actually physically touch, but then when you get into nuclear, you're getting into atoms. So it's into these very small, minute little things, and you're like, this is crazy. And what's really cool about nuclear to me is that if I split an atom, if I take a uranium-235 atom and I split it, I generate around 200 megaelectron volts of energy. What does 200 megaelectron volts of energy mean? Well, if I had a paper clip, it would lift it about 1 millimeter. You're like, well, that's not very impressive. Then you realize that's one atom. You realize how many billions and trillions and quadrillions and quintillions and sestillion, numbers of atoms there are in, a soda can worth of uranium, which, by the way, a soda can worth of uranium or you mine is enough to power your life, you for your lifetime.
So a solar can would be able to power my life for the whole lifetime.
Yes, and that's only 0.7% of that uranium is used. If we use some of the advanced reactor designs, we can use the remaining 99.3%, and then you can power probably 150 people's lifetime with that.
And if I have to go on to that trajectory of conversation, if you have to give a broader understanding of a layman's understanding on nuclear reactors, whether they are on a vessel, whether they are on a stable ground, or on an aircraft, and then the range of reactors.
Yeah.
A quick dummies lesson.
Yeah. All right. So the way that a guy that I work with, he was a licensed reactor operator at Surrey. And the way that he used to say it, he goes, the magic rock boils the water that makes the steam that causes the roundy that makes the arky sparky.
Arky sparky.
So this is from a commercial power station, right? But really all I'm doing, what a nuclear reactor is doing is I'm using it to make heat, right? That action of breaking the atoms is generating heat.
Yeah.
And what do I do with that heat, right? Well, a coal power station, I burn coal. A large gas power stations, I burn gas, right? And I use it to heat water. And I can use that, I can make that water into steam and I can turn a turbine, right? The only difference when I'm breaking an atom, there's no emissions, right? There's literally, I mean, I take this atom, I break it into two smaller elements, and it's done in such small scales. The submarines that are coming here, their reactor core, the entire fuel for 33 years of operations will fit in the wheelie bin you put out to your verge.
Okay.
Right. So they're not big. And that's the entire, there's all sorts of complex machinery in there. And I don't even remember the number, and I couldn't tell you the number, but the quantity is very, very low of actual materials that you're using to make these things run for so long. So I think that's one of the things that's very fascinating. Now, when you get into different nuclear technologies, right, you're going to hear things like pressurized water reactors, boiling water reactors, molten salt reactors, gas-cooled reactors. Like all it is, we're just changing the different methods. Instead of using like water to cool the reactor, I'm changing it to a salt that you heat up to liquid form, or I use a gas instead. But it all works with the same principle. I just make heat, and I use that heat to heat a fluid that can turn a turbine, right? So that reactor break atoms, generates heat. I have some medium that is of a fluid, meaning a gas or liquid, that flows through that is used to then turn a turbine. And that rotational energy is what I use to either drive a ship through the water or make electricity. And if you think about it, right, it's no different than the alternator in your car that makes it recharges your battery. Yeah. I literally have an engine that's rotating, and I have a little gear that turns that, or a little belt that turns that via gears. And that little alternator is powering your battery. It's no different. It's just we're doing it with a wholly different system as opposed to burning of carbon.
And what people say, okay, it's the atom. There's no pollution happening. There's no smoke coming out of it. But what would come out of breaking an atom would be radiation. That's another. So how do you manage radiation in a smaller contained vessel?
So
what is radiation to start with?
Yeah, all right. So radiation, there's four major types of radiation that I like to talk about. And we experience radiation all around us all the time. So we have alpha particles, which are just the nucleus of a helium atom. And they come from really heavy elements. They're very bad if you get inside your body. Ever heard of like people concerned about radon? Yeah. If you breathe that in and get it inside of your body, it's alpha. They do lots of damage, but because it's a highly massed, highly charged particle, it actually won't penetrate the dead layer skin on your body, right? So that's the first type. Your big heavy elements, your uraniums, your plutoniums, that's typically how they decay. The next are beta particles, which are either electrons or positrons, right? If we know our atom, right, you have the nucleus, which has the protons and the neutrons, and the electrons circle around that. So electrons will sometimes be emitted from the insides of the nucleus because it's unstable and it's trying to remove. The reason why things emit radiation is because they're unstable and they're trying to get stable. Yeah, that's what it's trying to do. Is it's just trying to hit a stable state. And so they may eject an electron out, and so the nucleus gets more positive, and that electron then goes out and interacts, and the electrons won't penetrate your clothing. Again, you don't want it inside your body, so you don't want to swallow this stuff. The next one are gammas. Gammas are just light waves, right? So we see, the light that comes out from us. The number one source of everyone's radiation on the planet is the giant nuclear reactor that shows up at sunrise and leaves at sunset.
Yeah.
And we, in Australia, our PANSA website will tell you receive 1.7 millisieverts of radiation from predominantly the sun every year, which is about 0.7 millisieverts less than what I got in 20 years in the U.S. Navy from nuclear reactor operations. And then, so the last one is neutrons, and neutrons only come from nuclear reactors, and neutrons are easily stopped by typically water, and they just get absorbed in elements. So those are the types of radiation. And when we talk about radiation, we like to talk about there's three things to achieve what we call as low as reasonably achievable, or a LARA. And those three things are time, distance, and shielding. Right. So I want to minimize my time in radiation fields. I want to maximize my distance from radiation sources. And then I want to shield from it. So our nuclear reactors, we have a primary shield that's around it. And that primary shield is made up of typically steel and lead and water to ensure that the majority of the radiation doesn't expose the workforce. We're not even into the public. And then we have a secondary shield that is used. And that secondary shield provides additional shielding, right? So the primary shield is right around the reactor, and then typically in your containment structure, that's going to contain, if there was something were to go bad, that holds everything in. You have a shield. You have a shield there that keeps everyone safe. From a public perspective, the industry is keeping you safe by virtue of the fact that you have that shielding. The other thing is you have is distance. If you live next to a nuclear power station for a year with its reactors operating, and you ate a banana, that banana will give you as much radiation as living next to that nuclear power station. That one banana. Okay. So the amount of radiation.
So in Australia, we love bananas.
Yes. Yes. So that's radiation. And then the other thing is that when we talk about radiation, it's not just radiation. So we have to talk about radioactive material. So when we break the atoms, or when the neutrons are absorbed by materials, they generate elements that are unstable, and they're trying to become stable by releasing radiation. And those unstable elements, that's called radioactive material. And that's where you have the concerns of release. And so throughout nuclear power stations, you have all sorts of radioactive material that is generated. And we have to wear special protective clothing. I'll make sure to send you a photo of what that looks like, where I'm literally covered head to toe in paper clothing. And it's not designed to protect me from radiation. It's designed to protect you, the public, from radioactive material being spread out so that you don't get radiation. And so it's just, think of it like, if you're in a room where you see all the particles in the air, it falls on you. And so we take it off, we throw it into these bins, and then we make sure that we're scanned out. As far as one of the things that's really interesting about radiation is that everyone here in Australia probably will experience some kind of radiomedicine treatment. And sometimes they'll do things like some treatments where you have to drink something, and they'll see how those radioactive isotopes are going to go through your different, your kidneys or your liver and stuff like that, so they can read and scan you using radiation, right? And so you do those treatments. If you get that treatment and you work in the nuclear industry, you can't go to work until your body has processed it out, because you will not be able to leave because your radiation levels will be too high. So meaning that if you look at the level of radiation of like waste and management from radioactive waste, medical waste is actually much higher than most of your industrial waste from nuclear reactors.
But the next question is waste management then. So and most of the people, we don't want the idea which is used by majority of the public, or not idea, if you run a scare campaign on nuclear, so you have to scare people off, and then you will say, oh, where would the waste go? And not in my backyard. So that kind of a conversation keeps on coming from the political point of view or campaigns point of view. So how is that mindset one could manage? How do you respond on waste management? How do you think about that?
So I know that Australia has a permanent repository here in Sandy Ridge, and I think they have 4 other identified sites. So there's TELUS is a company that manages the site out at Sandy Ridge. They have First Nations approval to have it, and they are currently storing hospital waste from, I think, most of the states and lots of private industry. They don't have any Commonwealth waste, so the federal government hasn't authorized them. But again, going back to that, right? These hospitals have large quantities of radioactive waste stored in their basements, for lack of better location, right? So there's actually large amounts of radioactive waste already around everyone, and it's being driven across the roads and all that. And that medical waste actually has higher radiation levels than what is going to come out of these submarines that are going to come here as part of AUKUS. From a general waste, the low-level waste that the submarines will produce during their operational time. And by the way, I think the United Kingdom says they generate 60 kilograms of low-level radioactive waste per submarine per year, which is not a lot, right? So if you took 5 submarines, it would maybe fill the bed of a ute, right? It's not a lot. Like the U.S. has 70 plus nuclear reactors in their military between the submarines and aircraft carriers. And by the way, each aircraft carrier has 2 reactors, and they're huge. And the quantity of waste they generate from a volume perspective is a cube the size of a Toyota Corolla, the length of a Toyota Corolla. So it's when you're thinking the size, it's actually not that much from a waste management perspective. And the radiation levels are actually a lot lower. And most of it is it's your personal protective equipment. It's maybe some valves, maybe some gaskets and O-rings, and it's going to look like most of the stuff you see at the irrigation aisle at the Bunnings. It's nothing that you're like, that's it. Well, the first time you see some of this stuff, and the scaremongering and the fear-mongering, it's like that's all that is. It's a tool that broke that we had to now, because it has complex things. We have to go store it as waste for X number of years until the radioactive material decays, and then it's just regular rubbish.
Another technology within the nuclear we talk about is SMRs, small modular reactors. So how are they different than nuclear power sources or main larger nuclear power plants?
So a small modular reactor, the definition is, I think it's between 50 megawatts and 500 megawatts. I can't remember the exact number. But what makes a small modular reactor different than, say, a large scale commercial reactor is that it's modular in construction. So there's great videos of you see how aircraft carriers somewhere, they build these modules, and they put them together. And so what you're doing with an SMR is that you're trying to do that where, instead of having to build everything in place, in the US we call it a stick build, where you basically, you start from the foundation, you build all the way up, and you bring all the raw materials on, and then you build everything up. You see it with construction here, where all the cinder blocks show up, they start laying cinder blocks. With a small modular reactor, we say, hey, we're going to build this section as a raft, and we do all this building instruction and testing, and then we bring it all the way to the site and we install it. And then we have, let's say, the turbine raft, then we have the condenser raft, and we have the power unit raft, and we have all these different things. And we build the structure that goes around, install those things, connect it together. We do testing. We do different testing goes on before bringing it online. Submarines are a prime example of a small modular reactor, right? That is actually a true modular design. The way the U.S. Navy builds Virginia-class submarines is they actually have the very bows of all the submarines are all built in Virginia. There's middle sections that are all built in Connecticut, and they literally ship these modules back and forth, and they connect them together. They assemble the Lego blocks at the final, and they deliver the submarine out of either Newport News or Newport News, Virginia, or New London up in Connecticut. And there's great videos you can watch if you like Virginia-class submarine launch. You'll see some great videos and show time lapses, and there's all sorts of neat little things where you can watch where they move these modules around.
Wow. How has from an American point of view, the idea of nuclear power, nuclear reactors, nuclear arms, in vessels and aircrafts, and versus the nuclear arms, or as in bombs, how is that conversation in the same breath people take, or what's the politics of that, all those things together?
So I get very frustrated because the nuclear weapons industry doesn't take ownership for their problems, and the nuclear power industry has to answer for their mistakes. When you look at a lot of the issues, specifically out of the Bikini Atoll area, and Americans, so it's America Samoa, there was some weapons testing, and there's some containers that are leaking. And that's all from our weapons programs. And the power industry, for some reason, has to answer for those. The technologies are very different, by the way. It's very different to make a bomb compared to a nuclear reactor. And my wife and I kind of came up with this analogy is that if you took, uranium as the raw material to make the raw material to make a bomb or a weapon, and let's assume it's like flour. So we're gonna do baking. We're gonna do a baking lesson here. So let's assume that the uranium is flour, and I want to turn that into a bomb. I'm going to turn that, say, into the white sandwich bread that you're going to make, and then what the United States is delivering in a nuclear reactor on a submarine is chocolate chip cookies. So you have to unbake the flour from the chocolate chip cookies in order to make that back into it, which is impossible, as you know. So it's much more challenging, it's very difficult to take a nuclear reactor and turn it into a bomb. However, it's actually very easy to go the other way. And I say that because I believe it was the START 3 treaty, the United States purchased the uranium weapons from the Russians, and the United States nuclear fleet is being powered by down-blended uranium from their weapons program. So they're actually, and that, by the way, once it's in that nuclear reactor and it's consumed, it's no longer can be used as a weapon. So it's the programs are somewhat interrelated, but it just becomes a challenge because like everyone hears nuclear and they immediately think bomb, right? But really, it's such a more complex, or they think Chernobyl, which is poor design with very poor safety features. And a very poor safety culture with very intrusive government interaction or involvement that caused that. It's very it's frustrating from my perspective. But yeah.
And from an historical context, in terms of the scaremongering across those incidents, not just Chernobyl, but a few others, and as an outsider observing Australian politics, what's your observation on the idea of using nuclear just as power source?
There is no nation on this planet that has a nuclear navy that does not have a commercial nuclear sector. So I think that will be a challenge. Nuclear power plant operators are the highest paid workers in any blue collar field or any trade style field on the planet. They're the highest paid they're highest paid employees on the planet. They get paid very well for what they do because they're highly knowledgeable. I think Australia is going to have a mass exodus of their smartest if they don't believe that they don't need nuclear power plants to engage these highly competent sons and daughters that are being trained by the U.S. Navy into this new technology to Australia, because the U.S. and international nuclear communities will snatch them up and will pay them very well to work in those. So I'm not saying that Australia should lift their ban, but if they want to keep their sons and daughters, they should consider it from that perspective. It's an interesting challenge when you think about it. I think the nuclear energy is great in the mix. I don't think that we should have 100% nuclear powered grid. I think that's a silly thing, because if you were to say have a shortage of uranium, granted, assuming that you're getting multiple reactor designs, but you have a shortage of fuel, then you can't, that power becomes no longer viable, right? I think a mixed grid of, oil and gas and nuclear and wind and solar and hydro and geothermal makes sense, because much like, all of our, superannuations, right? They're not into one stock, right? Let's use a blend of stocks. Yeah. And that's what makes sense. The other thing is that you can design a nuclear reactor to follow your grid, so that you're not relying on huge giant battery banks to make up for it when you no longer have power supply. Or if you have a very heavy renewables grid, you can actually have your nuclear follow or provide the power during those troughs. And historically, the United States did that.
The mathematical question of being the net zero, net zero emissions. How scientifically it's true? Can you achieve net zero? or is it a mathematical equation? You're just playing with numbers?
That's an interesting. I've never been asked that question. It's an interesting thing that's very thought provoking. I don't think that net zero is possible anywhere. I don't think you can. I think that it's just because you need some consumption of fossil fuels, right? And that could be something as simple as you're out camping and you're burning wood, right? Well, you say, yeah, but that's just that's a natural thing that's going to be turn into that. It's like, okay, yes, but you're burning that, right? It doesn't matter, right? While electric cars are nice, you're going to need things for like petrol cars and all that stuff. And you can use nuclear power in ships, but what about smaller vessels? Each system of power needs to match the actual demand. Yeah, it needs to be scaled to what it is, right? So while wind and solar, I think, are great on small scales, when you get into large scales, you start to have huge issues with firming of your power, your reliability of it. When I go down south here in WA and the lights are constantly flickering, well, that's because you don't have a giant rotational machine to maintain that 50 hertz power. You're relying on all these solid state devices that are fighting with their electronics, are actually fighting each other. That's what the flicker is. Is it's actually these electronics components that are consistently trying to adjust to match each other, and they're fighting each other, and that's what happens. I've seen that in my military career with just two pieces of equipment, where literally they're fighting which one owns the equipment. And if you don't have those gains just right, they legitimately were transferring the entire load of a vessel back and forth at 1 hertz. Now, when you take two pieces of equipment, you can tune them very easily. Grids are made up of thousands of machines that are spinning, which they just sync with each other because it's a mechanical motion. But when you're looking at thousands of these solid state devices, of these computer-based devices, they're going to fight with each other, and you're going to have your grid do weird, crazy things. And a lot of it's they're trying to, the way that the inertial that goes with the load of the actual machine, they're just fighting with each other, and you're going to, with weird, crazy things, and you get cascading faults that happen with that. So there's some real challenges when it comes to a very solar and wind-based grid that comes in there. Fine if you have large machines to make that work. But if you're going to put flywheels in, now you're choosing energy to spin something when you could just spin that to make electricity. So instead of, there's just a lot of challenges that I see there.
Across the mix of solutions, and then from coal, gas, wind, solar, and nuclear, in terms of emissions, so which one of these is the lowest emissions? Or the highest emissions? So coal is the highest emissions. When you look at when you take everything into account, and this is one thing that the wind and solar people don't like to take account, is the fact that they use more concrete than a nuclear power station does per power generated, right? Per kilowatt.
Nuclear reactor, concrete releases CO2 this is why you can never get to net zero, right? Because we need concrete. Concrete releases CO2 as part of the curing process of the concrete. The fact you have to transport it, the fact you have to mine materials. So there's all these factors that go into it. When you take the whole system of the different power generations, wind and solar are good, right? Hydro is pretty good too. But nuclear is the least carbon intensive power generation of all energies. Because in the end state, it generates none, and it actually has the smallest footprint of any non-fossil based power design. I think gas has a smaller footprint, but I know it actually has smaller than, like, the footprint of land needed is actually smaller for nuclear than it is for coal. And it's like between 3 to 1,000 times smaller than wind and solar.
What I'm doing here is I'm trying to understand more things from my understanding as well. That's why I'm trying to ask a lot of questions which are very fundamental and basic. And hopefully the audience also, is on the same journey as me. I am. in terms of from the emissions conversation, if we have to achieve somewhat close to net zero, we can't achieve net zero net because there's a zero-sum game happening there. So technically, the fastest or the long-term solution to achieve sustainably, and while understanding the growth in the power consumption needs across the countries, what kind of a mix one should work for?
So I will say right now, this is a very much an opinion on me, and I don't know a lot about this. This is not my expertise. I'm not a grid expert, if you will. But you would probably want your plurality. So maybe not 100%. I know France does really well with about 70% nuclear, and they have a great grid, and they actually export a lot of power. So I would think that 40 to 80% of your grid nuclear is probably a smart range. I don't know the right answer. I'm not that guy. But I do believe that having a very nuclear intense grid makes sense. And one of the things that I think a lot of people seem to not understand is that while nuclear takes a long time to build, it is a multi-generational investment. The United States, the power station that I worked at, was built construction was started in the 1960s, I believe. It started operation in the 1970s. It's licensed to go to 80 years now.
80 more years now.
80 total years.
Okay.
But right now, the U.S. regulator is considering how do we license nuclear reactors to beyond 100 years. So the fact that you can build a nuclear reactor and it's going to last for a century, right? So, it's a nuclear reactor is mostly steel and concrete. That's the majority of it. Steel and concrete, some of that equipment gets swapped out. When you look at like a solar panel, over time it degrades. You have to replace the whole solar panel, which is your whole power unit, right? Over a wind turbine, every 10, 15 years, you have to replace the blades on it. Yes, every 4.5 to 6 years, you have to replace all the fuel in a nuclear reactor, and you replace them in thirds. But still, that's a very small footprint on your overall nuclear power station, right? When you look inside of the big giant containment structure that's inside of the primary shield tank and the primary reactor core, it's one segment of it. It's so small when you look at the footprint. And when you look at like from a waste profile perspective, the nuclear, the quote unquote nuclear waste, the leftover, the spent fuel from the U.S. nuclear industry would fit in a large Bunnings from 70 years of operations. With up to 40% of our grid, in the 1980s, 40% of the U.S. grid was nuclear powered. So.
Wow. The old coal power plants, which, we have, is there how much of that can be reused if you want to convert that to a nuclear power plant? Because there was a conversation around that, to use old coal power plants to do things with it so that it can be used as a nuclear power plant. So
the Chinese are building coal plants with that in mind.
Okay.
So could you do it? Yes. Should you do it? Probably not. The way the Chinese are doing it is because China's building lots of coal power plants. And those coal power plants are actually being designed with this as the end state in mind. So they have nuclear reactors that they are testing that are designed around that. So they built a coal plant. They have a coal plant design that's designed around being replaced with nuclear. An existing coal plant was not designed for that. Could you do that? Yes, but if you look at a house that was built in the 1930s, the 5 extensions on it, that's kind of hard to get around. That's the house I live in. It's kind of a weird. They're very eclectic, but it becomes very complex. You have issues where we have some issues of leakage and there are areas this doesn't make sense, and the lighting is bad. The lighting may be bad in this area, and the electrical is bad in this area because it's this Frankenstein's monster of a house. Well, doing that with a nuclear reactor and a coal plant may not make a lot of sense. Now, that being said, using an old coal site, right? Because that, if I put an equivalent size nuclear reactor where I had a coal plant, they're the same principle of what's known as a Carnot steam engine. It's just a big steam engine. It's the same energy needed to make that work, right? They work the same principle, right? I literally take steam, run it through a turbine, goes to a condenser that's cooled with a lake, a river, an ocean, treated sewage like in Phoenix, Arizona, and then I pump that water back in and I recycle it. That's the same. That system right there, from a operational perspective, is the same in a coal plant as is a nuclear power station. So if I have 1,200 megawatts worth of coal plants in a site, I could use a 1,200 megawatt nuclear reactor in that same site.
Have you observed nuclear power plants being built from scratch? And have you been part of any projects, and what does it take to build one?
So I have seen lots of naval nuclear power plants built from scratch. I'm certain you're aware of USS Minnesota. I was her first regulator. I was the regulator that was my project. And I watched as she was a primary shield tank that arrived. The reactor pressure vessel with the primary shield tank. And I watched it sitting in a stand, and I watched that get assembled. I watched the submarine get assembled into a final product. I left that position before she was delivered, but I've been involved in every stage of a submarine construction because the U.S. has them being constructed, at every stage. At the same time, while that was happening, I was also there for the construction of USS Gerald R. Ford. And so I got to observe her reactor pressure vessels landed into her primary shield tank. So I was there to watch that. So I've seen lots. I've been involved in the construction. I have not seen it from a commercial perspective, which is a very different animal, because you have to. Those reactors don't move. So there's a different environment under them. The way we operate a naval nuclear reactor is it's sitting in water. So your cooling medium is always there while it's operating. You don't have the same concerns of issues of, levels in your water. If the water levels get too low, you may have to ramp down your reactor. We do have issues of biological things, right? Where jellyfish get sucked into your condensers. That happens on board vessels. There was a big instance in France where they had some fouling that occurred. It's that happens, right? And guess what happens at a coal plant? It happens anywhere. It's like saying when a hailstorm comes and takes out a solar farm, we'll ignore that, but that happens in any power, right?
Yeah.
When the big giant storm took out the grid in Texas, right? There was a nuclear reactor went down. There was the wind that went down because the wind turbines froze over. The solar turned off because the storm coated everything in ice. They weren't working. It shut down the gas transmission. Every power was affected by the weather. By the way, the first thing that was back online was the nuclear reactor, and they take 24 hours to start up. So it just because of the nature of what nuclear is. It gets negative media attention no matter what, even when those same things occur everywhere. I like to tell people, go search natural gas explosion and find how many natural gas explosions are, and you just ignore it. But if a nuclear reactor trips offline because they had a fault and an automatic protective feature made sure that reactor was safe, that hits the news. So just because of the word nuclear, it changes the way we think.
Probably the logo is the logo of the nuclear reactors, the logos we use a bit more dark and scary. On this journey of, because as green we are, as in green in terms of not too much of conversations being happening in terms of talking about nuclear power plants and broadly, how might we long term people can, in terms of education and what kind of campaigns, what do you think are relevant in terms of for people to get that scary thing off? Because as you say, the media just goes negative all the time. But how do you translate that conversation into more softer and subtle or factual to start with?
So you might as well have just quoted the International Atomic Energy Agency's statement on social license about factual, right? Using scientific facts. The part that's hard is that facts are boring, and they aren't scary, right? And scary things sell, right? Let's be honest, right? If you look at the media, it's all about scary things. And one of the things that Australia has as a benefit is they're bringing nuclear submarines here. And if you suddenly inject a community filled with people that are not afraid of nuclear, and then be like, aren't you scared of that? It's like, I'm not, right? I have stood next to a nuclear reactor with its fuel being removed and been excited. And I think this is super interesting, this is super neat. And it becomes just understanding the facts. Like one of the things that's fascinating is we use these big giant spent fuel pools. And if you take a Geiger counter and you put that Geiger counter measures radiation, and you measure the radiation levels above the spent nuclear fuel, the most radioactive things on the planet, and above that spent fuel pool with its 6 meters of water, you have a radiation level. If you take that same Geiger counter and walk outside, it'll be higher, right? So when you understand risk, it's about risk management. We manage risk in our lives all of the time, right? If you light a match, that fire can burn you. Same thing with nuclear. If you don't understand it, it can burn you. The thing is that what makes nuclear scary is its distance. It's hard to go in and see a nuclear reactor. That's really hard because we want to protect the public. So therefore we exclude the public from going in and see certain things. So things like information centers are a big thing. I know that the Australian Submarine Agency is building an information center to talk about the new submarines that are coming. So that's important, right? Having those conversations, things like information centers, things that can explain that, and having competent people to talk about that. When you go to every power station in the United States, their license requires a visitor center. So in order to have a license, you have to have a visitor center that's open to the public. And then part of their license is they have to do public tours periodically, right? And people come in and they go to the, they'll take them to the control room simulator. And when I say control room simulator, this is not like a computer. I mean, it is a computer, but it is a big giant computer that is designed to look just like the control room, to the point where in the United States, it is a finable offense if the rubbish bin in the control room that you operate out of is black and your rubbish bin in the simulator is gray. That's a violation of the similarity requirement, and you can get fined for that as a power station. You have to match, it has to be so close to the reality that you, as the person who is training on that, should not be able to tell the difference. Are there differences? Yes, but it's supposed to be minimized to the point where this is not meant to be pretty close, it's meant to be as close as possible. And then when you see people, and I actually I helped a group of Aussies go and get a tour of Surrey Power Station. When they walked into the control room simulator, I told them this, and there's something about seeing is believing. When you walk in, they're like, holy smokes, this is completely different. The other thing that they said was, when you talk to people who work in this industry, we speak very differently about nuclear safety and perspective. When they came out of that, these fine people that were out there, they said, it's like safety was oxygen. And then he goes, oxygen is too external. It was more like it was in their DNA. We think in terms of safety in everything we do. Everything we do, we treat it from a nuclear safety perspective, right? So with the submarines that are coming in here, I look at this from a perspective of, okay, inside that submarine is it United States sovereign territory, United Kingdom sovereign territory. They have regulators that are going to maintain that. But that submarine is going to pull up to that pier. And that pier has a shore power connection. And that shore power connection is going to be used to provide power to that submarine to keep that reactor maintained while shut down. How is Synergy's actions going to cause an accident on that submarine? That's how I think, right? And how do I prevent that? And these are the things that are in my mind, right? Where I go, if they conduct maintenance on the switchyard that impacts that power supply, how is that coordinated with that submarine to make sure that they're not doing maintenance on their emergency diesel generator such that you end up with a reactor without power, right? And so that's a change in mindset that will have to begin in Australia that doesn't exist right now. And that's because nuclear is so far from here. Distance matters in this. Like, there's been psychological studies have been done that said the further you are away from a nuclear power plant, the more anti-nuclear you are, because you just don't understand it. If you go to communities that are right next to nuclear power stations, they're pro-nuclear.
that's probably fair because they're living there for long and then they're getting used to it. And then you're too close and you have a nuclear family, nuclear power couple.
Yes.
That's what you use the word. Can you also talk about the use of nuclear in the space agency? Is there one and how it is being used?
So it's currently being deployed, or it's currently being operated on Mars. So there's a nuclear battery that is powering the Martian rover. So nuclear energy is already there. The United States in 2018, they tested what's known as the kilopower reactor. Mm-hmm. The actual reactor power unit, everything's about the size of a mini fridge. Mm-hmm. And it can power 4 homes for about 20 years, designed for lunar and Martian missions. So nuclear in space is a big thing. When I first got work for the regulator, they had changed the name.
And you have a social license.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, the Martians are going to be, they're going to be upset if we're using nuclear, although they're getting bombarded by far more radiation from the sun because of their
distance.
The atmosphere and the lack of a magnetic field. Mm-hmm. From a radiation perspective, astronauts receive far more radiation than nuclear operators. Mm-hmm. Like on the verge of an astronaut's radiation exposure is 4 times in one trip to space mm-hmm. is 4 times the radiation exposure I got from 20 years in the U.S. Navy. Mm-hmm. So one trip to space, right? For like a short trip, right? We're not talking the International Space Station guys. They're mm-hmm. getting way more, mm-hmm. right? I'm talking, back in the days of the space shuttle where they go up for a week, come back down.
Yeah,
they're getting as much as I got in 20 years in naval nuclear service.
I need to understand a bit more from your point of view because, again, as an outsider, how do you see the politics being played around the idea of nuclear? Because still AUKUS is happening. It has started when the Liberal Party was in power, then Labour, and the second round of Labour Party. So it's continuing. So there's a continuity of that, commitment to AUKUS has been happening. So, but political narrative changes across terms. So how do you see that as an observer?
It's very fascinating.
And people are these days saying, "Oh, it might not happen."
Yeah.
Ex-prime ministers.
Yeah. My take on nuclear is that once the AUKUS deal was signed, that was really the end of the ban. It was just when, not if, because the nation is going to get used to this, right? Again, it's that distance thing. Once you have it, it's you're going to go, wait a minute. It's fine on submarines. It's good on submarines. And you go, well, why is it if they're doing that? And all of a sudden you have this influx of these nuclear trained people that are in the community and they're talking. And all of a sudden, then you see the people of Fremantle and Rocking where you go, well, it's not that scary. That's just right there. I mean, they tell us they're going to run these drills and what the drills mean, and why they're doing this. They have radiation monitors that the public can look at. By the way, that's what the U.S. does for the aircraft carrier in Japan. And you go, wait a minute, this isn't really that scary. And they learn from it and they get education. Next thing you know, they're like, well, if it's not that big a deal, why wouldn't? I mean, I've got all this heavy industry up and down the coast going from Frio down to Rockingham, right? Mm-hmm. With, the Kwinana and all that stuff. And you go, well, why don't I just put a nuclear power plant down there too? Because I've got this big body of water called the ocean that I can use as my cooling medium. And why not just do that? And then, I can use excess power for desalination. There's all sorts of things you can do with all that power that is, exceptional to make, I have a reliable grid, I'm able to generate water with it, for drinking water for the public, right? Next thing, it's like, well, why do we just start with one? Do we start with one and we build 2? And next thing you know, then the people in Sydney are going, well, wait a minute, the power prices dropped in WA because 10 years ago, they built a nuclear power station. I said 10 years ago, right? Because it costs a lot of money to build them. Mm. But much like when you own a home, right? When you buy a home, they're very expensive to buy.
Yeah.
And then once you've bought the home,
the dividend comes slowly.
Right? And you've paid it off. Well, now you don't pay your mortgage anymore because there's no mortgage, right? So it's the same type of thing the nuclear power station is that over time they get more cost effective. They're very expensive up front, right? But it's also more expensive when you think about when you're renting, and that's really what wind and solar are, with the short-term power, right? We're talking about short-term versus long-term. Gas and coal and all are like that medium term where, maybe it's a long-term lease. But if you're constantly changing houses, right, the rents keep getting raised, and the prices keep going up because it's matching the market. Whereas nuclear, you're matching the market on a couple of things, but overall you built your power station using labor from, 20, 50, 30, 20, 60 years ago. Well, you paid for that. It's done. The labor you're paying now is a minor fraction of what you were paying for the labor back then.
How do you explain or explain a bit more on the idea of to be a sovereign country, you have to be secure on energy. So energy security is very much closely linked to be a sovereign nation.
I mean, yeah. So energy security, right? And I know that there's some topics about the amount of the oil reserve that's in Australia. It's like 10 days long or something like that. And now, granted, I'm not sure. I don't think that would impact the grid so much. That'd be more of a transportation issue. But there are lots. Energy is key, right? Energy is how everything runs, right? It is the center of everything we do. From the it's what heats our homes. It's what, cooks our food. It's what transports our goods, everything, right? So, and energy is not just electrical power, but when you have your electrical grid really stable, you can have heavy industry, right? The amount of, companies that have withdrawn from the grid and have their own power stations here in Australia is crazy to me. In the US, we don't have that. Our companies don't have their own grids, right? What they do is they connect with the grid and they actually help maintain our grid, right? So one of the things that we do is that we have curtailment periods, meaning that in the middle of summer, to help keep our grid level, they're not allowed to, when we have these heavy electrical industries, heavy electrical dependent industries, they can't come onto the grid when we are at peak demand for electrical consumption as a population. So they plan their maintenance and schedule everything during those periods, and they transition. I say this as an example of one of the steel mills that I interviewed with to get a job. I showed up and they got me in there before they hit curtailment, so I could see them doing the electric arcing. And they had to shut down right after that. But they used a bunch of gas burners for stuff. So the gas, they could continue working, but they couldn't smelt. They couldn't actually melt the steel, but they could take. They would roll plate. They made plate steel, but they could roll the plate because that used gas. So they were able to do their things and do their cooling and do their tempering because that was done with gas. But anything electric, they were shut off from. So understanding that there are actions that have to be done, to make sure your grid is firm. And when you do that, you're keeping your grid, right? Instead of having these big swings, which is one of the big challenges that wind and solar give you, is that I'm now using my industrial demand. So instead of my peak being here, I'm dropping my peak down to here. So now my cycle is here. Whereas as these big industries come off the grid, your peaks are getting bigger. And that causes more firming concerns and all that. And so the more you get your energy right, you have more industry, more reliability, and just your nation gets more things done correctly.
What we're also seeing is large tech companies are investing into energy across the world and having their own power plants in some way or form because they want higher consumption for their own data centers, and they're highly investing in those large data centers. Which means if that has to come to Australia to be on AI thing, the large data centers have to be, you consume more power than what would we normally consume. So you have to scale up the production capacity as a country.
Yes, yeah, and especially with data centers, you're seeing huge quantities, right? So the big 30 nations minus I think Australia, all committed to tripling their nuclear power output. The United States is committed to quadrupling their nuclear power output, and that a lot of that is driven by this AI revolution that is in progress. Those data centers use large amounts of power, and I've had the opportunity to discuss with some large data center companies. And one of the things about having it is that those power plants are going to connect to the grid, and what they can do is they can, if they need to, they can kill power to their data centers. So they can drop their power demand if say there's, let's say that you have some kind of weather event that shuts down a big portion of your grid, they can shut off operations. So internet's going to be slow for a few days while they're recovering, but they can transition their power to the grid. Grids are huge networks, by the way. The U.S. has, I think, we have 3 grids. We have the Eastern grid, we have the Texas grid, and then we have the Western grid. So we have 3 and that doesn't include, then you have Alaska is on its own, and then Hawaii's on its own. We have 3 major grids. And so if you were to have an event that say were to shut down 6 or 7 major power stations, you can use your data centers to firm your grid so that you can restore power much more rapidly as you're recovering those power stations. And so there's a benefit to having that. I mean, and you're seeing it from a nuclear power perspective. Constellation is restarting a nuclear power station. The United States is running out of nuclear power stations that we can restart that we shut down. And the United States is committed to building 10 brand new large-scale nuclear reactors because everyone is seeing this huge transition to this more energy demand. AI is energy intensive. If you want to have sovereign control of your AI, by the way, the United States is by far the vast majority of these AI data centers, like 70%. You're going to need that energy, and they are huge power consumers.
And globally, the top 5 AI core are of top 5. They're the Americans. And DeepSeek is Chinese, but everything else is American large AI models, which are running on large data centers. Yeah,
and that's a big thing is these large data centers, right? And one of the things that's fascinating to me is that where I lived in Virginia, not far from me is Loudoun County, Virginia, which the comment is 80% of internet traffic in the United States goes through Loudoun County, Virginia. And its number 1 power source is North Anna Power Station, which was the sister power station that was constructed with Surrey Power Station. It's a 2-unit nuclear facility. And I know that it's become such a topic of conversation that the state of West Virginia lifted their nuclear ban of construction because they see nuclear as the future in a state where if you'd have said that 10 years ago, the coal people would have dragged you through the streets and killed you. Like they are now seeing that nuclear is an important potential.
Political suicide.
Yes.
It was a political suicide.
It was political suicide. Now it's they say don't touch our coal. And I'm like, yeah, but look at your neighbors around you. And one of the things that I find very fascinating is all these politicians that talk about, well, our grid is this amount of clean energy. And I'm like, once you connect a machine to the grid, it's whatever that mix of the grid is. That's what your power consumption is, right? If you're, the U.S. is probably a great example of this. If, say, the power that your state produces is 70% nuclear, 20% wind, 10% solar. You go to the state next to it, it's 50% coal and all that. When you're connected to the same grid, your entire grid is the same, right? The electrons don't care where they come from. They're only going to go and power your stuff. And I tell people all the time, it's like, it doesn't matter, right? Physics don't care. The electrons don't care where they came from. They're going to go power it, and they're going to take the path of least resistance. And if you think that your grid that's connected to West Virginia is any better because we put all this wind and solar, well, those coal plants are all actually powering more at night because you've put a bigger demand signal onto them because you've said wind and solar. They're actually burning more fuel in another state, but you get to feel better. Again, I don't want to sound like I'm bashing wind and solar, but a lot of this is in the United States referred to as boutique environmentalism. Where I do these things that make me feel good. That
high model ground.
Yeah, that don't actually do anything.
But in the end, solar and wind will produce the same electrons.
Yes.
Just the same.
Yeah, they all produce the same electrons, right? And all it cares about, is it flows through the wires to get to your cord to make your refrigerator keep your food cool, right? That's really all we're looking at. And it's like, what is the best way to do that? I don't know. I don't know what the best way is for Australia. Australia's got to make that determination their own. And I try to stay politically out of it for the most part.
Have you used AI? And have you played with AI and how good it is in terms of being a chief nuclear officer? You tested it?
Yeah, so we use AI. So my company, UBH Group, we use AI. We have our own defense accredited AI system, so it can go on defense networks. And we have our own AI engineers, and I think from a nuclear perspective, specifically for supply chain for AUKUS, is there's a huge benefit if I take the license to work in the nuclear sector here. You have to meet the requirements for the supply chain management program that falls under the licenses that are going to come out. And not everyone has to meet the same requirements, right? So how do I build a Goldilocks program that says I make this widget that has no impact on nuclear safety, but it all falls under the same license. And I make this thing that's so important to nuclear safety. How do I develop a Goldilocks system, right? So what I'm getting is the right porridge for me, right? Mama bear liked it cold, Papa bear liked it hot, baby bear liked it right in the middle. So how do I make it to where we find the exact right porridge for this company, right? And that's what I think AI tools can do very well, is instead of saying, thou shalt comply with this 800-page document, every word of it, go, well, no, hold on. You do this, let me extract this, you extract these particular items out of it. This is what you need to demonstrate compliance with, to be in compliance with the law, as opposed to making the barrier to entry very difficult into this. There are opportunities to make the barrier to entry much easier. And that's where I think AI from a nuclear perspective in Australia has the huge benefit.
And from a longer term perspective, do you think an AI trained on all nuclear science will be able to take a job?
No, I do not. I do not, because AI can't operate switches the same way that human beings can that exist. AIs can't turn valves. There's a lot of the nuclear industry that is very, very manually intensive. And that was one of the things during the pandemic when everyone was sent home. I spent more time at work because
more power consumption.
Yeah, but it was just I had to go. Their valves don't turn themselves.
Yeah.
Right. So there are benefits that AI will have, but when it comes to actual nuclear power operations, AI is not going to be taking jobs because most of those jobs involve a lot of manual labor. While you say, yeah, we could put a motor on this. And okay, so now you have a motor on that, which means I have to have a technician to maintain that. And it's like, yes, I understand the idea of robotics and all that. Could you get to a point where this stuff maintains itself? Give me 2 centuries and I think we might get there. But I don't think we are nowhere close to that. I mean, especially when you're looking at, the way we're building reactors now, it's still, it's 1990s technology really. But, AI is not going to take over. We design these things with systems that require human beings. Because the other thing is if an AI makes a mistake and causes a major incident, it's a lot harder to stomach than if a human does. Right? That's the big challenge is that if we're allowing AI to make decisions about human life, that becomes a real challenge. And I don't think the world is ready yet for AI to make decisions about human life.
Nobody should be ready for that.
Yeah.
AI should take decisions on human life. In conclusion, I want to do 2 things, and I want you to do that analogy to make power the Arky Sparky one.
Okay.
Redo it. And in conclusion, I want you to paint a picture in terms of the future of sustainable power, the idea of sustainable power, and how might the science should be kept away from politics and the narrative.
Yeah.
Which is science is factual and politics is emotive.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, I don't know what better to say than to say that, yeah, let's get the politics out of science. The problem is that energy involves money, right? And there is lots of money to be made in any sector of the energy industry. So it doesn't matter. Politics are going to be involved. I don't want it to be involved, but it is, right? That's just the nature of it. And while it shouldn't be, it is. That's just the nature of it. It's just hard. I wish it was different. It's not. So I agree that it shouldn't be. We should develop a grid that makes sense. But while there's a good portion of the world that believes that climate change is a pending crisis. If we don't handle this now, that we're doomed to die. And there's a whole other group that says that climate change isn't a problem. that right there lends itself to a whole bunch of changes in how we're going to operate our energy infrastructure. And those are both political statements, right? I mean, you can look at climate models, you say that, it's like, well, I look at complex models and I go, every complex model I've seen falls apart really quickly. And when I, turn around and I go, well, the climate model is based off ocean depths, and the data from the ocean depths was based off of turn of the century sonar readings from the 1900s. And I go, well, what credibility does my climate model have when I'm using, 125-year-old data that missed underwater mountains in screenings like the USS San Francisco find out in 2005 when she ran into it. So understanding that even though there is science and calculation-based things, is that some things look like facts that are not facts. And so there is actually a role, I think, for political debate. Now, when it does, and I think the part that makes it hard is that things that look like facts and are actually political get translated in, and then people start saying, well, yeah, but your facts are wrong, when they start talking about actual science and actual facts. It becomes very much a challenge, right? I legitimately, during the last election cycle, someone made the comment, well, that's medical radiation, that's different. So we don't measure radiation in where it came from. We measure radiation in damage to the human body. And that source of radiation from medical is still damaging your body the same way that it is if it's coming from the sun, if it's coming from the x-ray machine that scans your teeth, if it's coming from a nuclear reactor, right? It's about managing the overall amount. And then turn around and going, well, hey, maybe if we aren't getting enough radiation, that's a problem too, because our body isn't being able to fight the cancers that come from that. And so therefore you have a weakened immune system because there are studies that are identifying that perhaps we actually are getting too little radiation and should be getting more. I'm not advocating for more radiation, but there are studies that are indicative that maybe that is the case. But again, it's getting into these weird nuanced arguments. Our human minds do not do well with more than two decisions. We like yes, we like no. We like black, we like white. And so it becomes very, very easy, to break this down into very, very simple terms. And the problem is that this is a very nuanced argument, right? Wind and solar are not bad power, right? There are great applications for them, but a renewable energy only grid does not make sense. Nuclear power is a great energy source. A nuclear power only grid does not make sense. A mixture of a grid, right, makes sense. And it's very hard. And I think the politics of that misses that point. The politics likes to take these complex problems and break it down into these simple black and white discussions. And that's where, when we get down to that, why does that statement of, how does nuclear power work, right? The magic rock, it boils the water, it makes the steam, which makes the roundy that causes the arky sparky, right? And that's the thing, is that we take this very complex thing and we break it down into these simple things. It is overall a relatively simple process, but the nuances of it are very complex.
Thank you.
Thank
you. On that note, thanks for your time today.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me. It's been wonderful.
It's a great chat.
Thank you. Yeah.